The figures that kind of worry me the most at the moment are the rise in young women who are dying by suicide. Although more men die by suicide, more women attempt. How can we as a society encourage people to be in touch with how they feel, be able to express that and then move through it, sometimes not feeling able to use emotion on your own behalf? The first person you need to be able to have a conversation with about it is yourself. And shame can be the brick wall in front of somebody's ability to talk about it. We need to smash the myth that saying that will put that idea in someone's head, or if they're having those thoughts already, that will trigger them to actually act. And the absolute opposite is true. We need to understand and accept and respect that when somebody is at a point of suicidal thoughts and feelings and actions, for them it feels rational. But helping somebody ask directly can sort of shatter that bubble of rationality that that person is sitting in. You can't drag anyone out of anywhere. What you can help do is stand by their side and take step after step after step. Children and young people need to be supported so they can go on to be adults that don't carry suicide and suicidality ready to kind of act on when life gets tough. CALM, Campaign Against Living Miserably, got a mission to make sure that suicide isn't people's only option, and also to make sure that people are ending their misery, not their lives. We don't want people to be able to walk past our campaigns. We want people to go, what did I just see? And engage with it emotionally so that either they can help themselves, help people around them, or, really push in society to get this addressed, because suicide numbers are not going down, as you'll know. Our helpline is open every single day of the year from 5 p.m. to midnight. People often say, why then? Well, that's the time when other services are not available. You can access via the telephone, or web chat, or WhatsApp. All our helpline staff are trained to meet you exactly where you are, to give you the time that you need. Also, if you're someone who's worried about anyone on that spectrum, because actually, often the person that can help somebody the best is somebody close to them.
It's my belief that too many societal problems persist because we keep relying on the same ways of thinking. Question the Default exists to challenge the norms that shape our society, dismantling the status quo and exploring better alternatives for how we live and manage our health and well-being. Question the Default is for those who are driven to create a better future. If this mission resonates with you, please consider subscribing, liking, or sharing. Every single small action helps us on our mission. Thank you. A truly progressive government would step up and take its responsibility for suicide prevention seriously. Wendy Robinson has dedicated her career to protecting young people from crisis, and she knows the system isn't doing enough. As a senior leader at CALM, the Campaign Against Living Miserably, she's worked from classrooms to national campaigns to meet people where they are at. In this episode, we talk about why helplines alone aren't enough, the overlooked reality of who's most at risk, and how postvention can actually be prevention. This is the conversation about urgency, innovation, and the courage to care differently. Wendy is someone that I've looked up to for many years, and I'm so pleased that she's on one of the early episodes of this podcast with us. Thank you. Wendy, welcome to Question the Default. It's a pleasure to have you on. I was sat at home calculating, and I worked out that you have spent over 10,000 working days supporting young people and now adults in the work that you've done across the charity space. Did you know that was the number?
I did not. Now you say, I should hope that I'm quite good at it by now then.
Was that always the plan for you?
No, it wasn't a plan. Although I think growing up, I had two things in mind. I always seem to have, I say all the time, I've got two hands, I can hold two things. Helpful to hold two kind of opposing thoughts sometimes. But I had a sense that I wanted maybe to be an actress or a singer, something on that way. And then there was a bit of a kind of working class, be sensible voice in my head, and that maybe took me down the road of thinking about social work. I remember doing A-level sociology, and it was the first time I learnt that society is a construct, and we're not all born to be certain ways. So I think there was something always a little bit there for me. I did it kind of that way round. I was a singer-songwriter first career, and then moved into being a therapist and the work that I do now.
Yeah. And was there anything from, you're a very creative person, I'm lucky enough to kind of know you personally, have you been able to bring that into your professional work?
I think for me, I've wondered how do those two join up, and I think the two are all about communication, actually, and creative communication. How can you express yourself? So I think as a singer-songwriter, it's all about that, and it's very much about all about me type thing, and then it becomes all about the other person. So I definitely think those two link, and I'm always curious about how can I help, or how can we as a society encourage people to be in touch with how they feel, be able to express that, and then move through it, because I genuinely feel that we get clogged up with a lot of stuff that gets stuck inside us.
Definitely. And I think I can definitely reflect on times where I've had to creative expression to help me get through very tough periods of time. And it's not necessarily the obvious routes of therapy and the obvious routes of vocalizing my thoughts, but actually writing down, drawing, being outside. So yeah, I completely can align. So today then, you are the services director at Calm. For those who don't know Calm, for those who don't know what that role entails, can you tell us a bit more, please?
Yeah, so Calm, Campaign Against Living Miserably, and we are exactly more or less what it sounds like we do. We've got a mission to make sure that suicide isn't people's only option, and also to make sure that people are ending their misery, not their lives. As services director, it's my responsibility to think about how are we actually directly and indirectly supporting people, providing services for them, whether it be our helpline or a whole range of kind of digital self-help stuff that we're good at creating and producing. So that's my role, really about looking at our beneficiaries. How are we actually getting our mission and our vision achieved?
Amazing. And so how, in a nutshell then, what's Calm's approach to preventing suicide in society?
We talk a lot about meeting people where they are. And I think what that means is kind of two things, is respecting that everyone, wherever they're at in terms of their acceptance of suicide as an issue or their motivation to make change in society, wherever someone is at, you can meet them at that place. Because actually, if you start to preach at people or speak down to them or not motivate them or kind of make it sound like, well, this stuff happens and nobody can do anything about it, then actually that doesn't kind of get them involved in their own lives or in campaigns like ours. But I think it's also about meeting people in the places that they are comfortable and already familiar. Because what we know about suicide is that actually there's quite a high percentage of people who will die by suicide and they will never have been in touch with a more formal service, if you like, a mental health service. So for us, it's all about being where people might not expect to find us. I think, when you go to the GP or you're in a health centre, or there are certain places where you might expect to see the poster on the wall, the leaflet in front of you. Also in the way we tell stories, often it can be that kind of arc of triumph where, people have a difficulty and they overcome. And actually, if you're not overcoming, if you're constantly struggling and not achieving, you can feel kind of left out of that narrative. So I think we, try and be where people don't expect to find us, but speak to them in a language that makes sense and that they feel comfortable with. But at the same time, being disruptive. We don't want people to be able to walk past our campaigns or, posters that we have around or any of our services. We want people to go, what did I just see? And engage with it emotionally so that either they can help themselves, help people around them, or, really push in society to get this addressed, because suicide numbers are not going down, as you'll know.
There's so much in there. And so you described this phrase, meeting people where they are at. So what does that mean in practice? How does Calm bring the message around suicide prevention and living miserably or preventing living miserably to real people in their everyday lives?
For Calm, I think it's really acknowledging the role that culture plays. And actually where people are comfortable. So as I said already, where do people kind of find themselves where they're able to kind of relax a little bit, have their guard down, where they can kind of feel themselves in that sort of like, empowered is a word that I'd use, but just be kind of like, hey, I'm kind of quite glad to be alive. This is where I belong. This is where my tribe is. So that might be music, it might be comedy, it might be sport, a whole range of places like that. Then engage with people who are in those spaces that people look up to and respect. Get them to acknowledge that actually life is hard and that feeling suicidal is not kind of an abnormal thing. 1 in 5 of us, actually 1 in 4 now, I think, with the new figures. So if we can meet people there, get people talking about it, and then they feel like, actually, this is normal, not normal to the point that we shouldn't try and change it, but normal to the point of human beings struggle. So for us, I think that's exactly what it means by meeting people where they are, not sitting in some ivory tower or clinical setting or even a charity that sort of looks like a charity. I mean, I've worked in this sector for a long time, as you pointed out how many hours I've
it was meant to be
slogged away at. And although I've loved everywhere I've ever worked, I think what really attracted me to Calm was that it looks real.
Okay.
And, you know, I think sometimes when we're trying to reach people with mental health or struggling, certainly with suicide, there is a tendency to need to kind of like downplay it a lot. I mean, I am a trained therapist, but I'm not somebody who speaks in therapeutic language all the time or feels that people have to be spoken to in that kind of gentle way. And I think the way that we are, you know, the colours that we use, the way that we present ourselves really catches not only people's attention, but makes them think, okay, they're able to speak like I do. I think any charity that can, you know, use profanities, not because profanities are, you know, cool and great, but actually that is how people speak. And actually we also know that profanities, using them wisely and well, it's very good for your mental health. So that's, you know, Calm, do things differently in that way and trying to speak to people and say, is this you? If it is, we're for you.
That's really interesting, this idea of language and why language is important. Do you think the tactical use of language and how Calm approaches that means that more people can think that this is an issue that could impact them and their family?
Yeah, I would hope so. I mean, I suppose I would take a kind of therapeutic view thinking about language. And what we know is that as human beings, we probably have maybe half a dozen words that we use to describe how we feel. And actually, that's really limiting. There's also plenty of evidence to show that the closer you can get to describe exactly how you feel, so, you know, annoyed, frustrated, let down, disappointed, all of those feelings could be under the heading bad. I feel bad today. Actually, if you're able to describe it much more closely, then you're more likely to feel like you've had that acknowledged by yourself and maybe other people and it passes through. So I think language is incredibly important in that way. Language, showing people how we speak, allows them to feel, actually, if that's how I speak and how I feel, then I'm okay to go forward and engage with their material because I know they get it.
And especially when they see it perhaps in the place that they're socializing or their art or their sport or perhaps in their education system, it means that there's almost like it's okay to speak about this topic. And something else that I picked up that you said then around, you know, many people are not actually in touch with mental health services when they die by suicide. I wonder, you know, we hear a lot around encouraging more people to speak up, talk. Well, actually, people are not actually accessing and engaging with some of these services. Do you think there must be more that needs to be done here, more conversation needed around this topic?
Yeah, for sure. And I think as much as talk about it as something to say and encourage people to do is really helpful, I don't think it's anywhere near enough. Because actually, or the thing of like, you know, maybe talking about sometimes men don't do emotions or something. Yeah. Well, you know, go to a gig, go to a football match. There's plenty of emotion going on. It's not about not being able to get in touch with the emotions. It's sometimes not feeling able to use emotion on your own behalf, if you like. And I think the whole idea of talk about it, the first person you need to be able to have a conversation with about it is yourself.
Yeah.
Because how then, unless you are owning it, acknowledging it, feeling that it's justified, that it's normal, that it doesn't sort of, you know, that shame piece, I think is a really big one. And shame can be like the brick wall in front of somebody's ability to talk about it.
Yeah, it's that idea of, you know, meeting people where they're at, but at the same time, that acceptance, like it's okay in that environment to speak. You know, something that I can relate to. I've witnessed firsthand a number of people that have been impacted positively by Calm's campaigns, when we were going into a bit more detail on some of those campaigns. But I was intercepted by a stunt that technically had no words in it, really, as I think back to it. The Project 84 campaign, which included essentially statues placed onto the top of the ITV Tower building back in 2018. And at that point, I had not shared my experiences of my own thoughts of suicide, but at the same time losing my father to suicide. And that started an inner conversation with myself. It wasn't like I suddenly started, you know, standing up and talking about suicide to large numbers of people, but it started an inner voice of me questioning whether I had to hide it anymore. And I didn't then suddenly jump to support services. I actually engaged with other sports people and business people who talk about mental health. Some of these people on the bookshelf here. And that then told me it was okay to then actually speak to a specialist about it.
So exactly that, isn't it? It's like having an experience that touches into something that you know is there. Yeah. There's a lot of fear, I think, that people have that if they speak to someone about suicide, say the word, that they're going to put the idea into their head. Yeah. Well, actually, that's not the case. Nobody usually puts anything inside somebody. It's already there. And so you see something like that, a campaign, it touches in on something. Then if you're able to have that conversation with yourself and can see, okay, if they're talking about it, maybe I can. What do I need to say? How do I need to say it? Where do I feel comfortable? So you start where you are, which is that, as you gave the example there in sport or business. And then actually, once you're more comfortable with it, that I think is often the place where you go and get specialist help. Yeah. Because then you're able to go there with something to say. That's why I'm never a fan of anybody sending anyone to therapy. I mean, I used to work, with children and young people, and they were often being sent. And most of the time when you actually, my framing of it would be, how can I help you? And usually they would say, I don't need any help. It's my mum or my dad or my school or something, the context around them. So I really think, helping somebody identify that something is an issue for them, and then letting them know there are many routes towards getting some support for that.
So you mentioned then around young people. How has your experience working with young people for a considerable part of your career helped you in what you now face? And so much conversations we see in the news and the headlines, and I worry about young people entering into the world of work and society that we have. But I'd love to tell us more.
I think I've always had a sense. I mean, I'm from a really large family and the youngest in that family of siblings. And I had the kind of chance, I suppose, to see my siblings have children growing up. I had a really solid sense of what happens to you in your childhood actually can set you up for the rest of your life, for good and bad. I kind of had that in me as a sense long before I ever kind of trained or, wanted to do it as a career. Just as I was kind of starting to think about, I was a singer-songwriter, but I was starting to think about other things. Childline was launched. I think that was way back in, 1990 or anyway, long time ago. No, much before. You'll have to check that. It wasn't 1990. Anyway, it seemed to me like the most simple idea to ask children and young people, how are they? How are things? Because, child abuse as a thing was only invented a certain period before that. Of course it wasn't. It's gone on forever. But actually something that people could speak about. Children's rights, human rights, children's rights, all of those things have been fairly recent developments. So just having that idea that, why wouldn't a young person want to be able to speak just as much as an adult? They have rights, they have... and the idea that anything that happens to you in childhood can set the tone. So once I kind of started to study that, I became even more determined. It's like, okay, so if you can start things out well, then you're not carrying it through. And then once you have children, if you're not carrying loads of stuff inside you, you're not passing it on. So I had this kind of real sense that you just want to kind of repeat patterns all of the time. I think for me as well, there's something really powerful about being a child or a young person, especially being a young person. You're on that threshold into adulthood. You've got one foot in your family, one foot in the outside world. And actually, what a kind of an amazing moment of potential that is. And then if you spend any time working in a support service like Childline or any service, or actually just talk to young people, you will hear how frightening it can be, or remember back to when you were trying to launch yourself into life. How frightening it can be, how much you need encouragement, how much you need to feel like kind of a naive positivity in some ways, but also that you're likely to take risks at that time because it's part of growing up. You're meant to do some things that put you in danger in some ways. But if you've been kind of encouraged to take some risks, but not too many, all the good stuff that happens in early childhood, if you've had that, you can take those risks and launch. But to listen to people who, and certainly when I was most recently at Childline, so although I started out a volunteer many, many, many years ago, 25 years later, I ended up going back as head of service and able to bring all the therapeutic learning I'd done over those 25 years to that service and kind of support it in its development, which is just beautiful for me personally. But when I actually heard some children talking about wanting to die, That I just really, I think society is failing pretty badly to have a large proportion of adults who want to die, and for that number not really to be changing much or growing. But to hear children say it at the beginning, when actually you would hope you wouldn't even really know enough about life to feel that it's not worth living. So for me, that's where that comes from, that actually children and young people need to be supported so they can go on to be adults that don't carry suicide and suicidality in their back pocket, ready to kind of act on when life gets tough.
This episode is brought to you in support of Calm, the campaign Against Living Miserably. Calm is a leading UK suicide prevention charity on a mission to help people end their misery, not their lives. We both do things differently. We both know we need to change the conversation around suicide, and that's why together we're both creating space to question the defaults that shape the way we think, feel, and talk about suicide and mental health. We're opening up conversations that remind people, whatever you are facing, you're not alone. Calm has loads of tools and resources available to anyone online to help you find the support that you need, including a life-saving helpline for people open every day from 5 p.m. to midnight, as well as vital online resources for anyone who needs them. So if you or someone you know needs to talk, please visit thecalmzone.net. Thank you for being part of this. And of course, today we may touch on conversations about suicide in this episode. Together, we can question the defaults that keep people silent, smash the stigma around suicide, and help build a world where no one has to face it alone. Thank you.
My head's really gone on a tangent how hard that must have been to witness a young child explaining they don't want to be on this earth. How did that impact you?
I'm one of those quite annoying people that is very solution focused. I kind of have this belief that everything is figure-outable.
Yeah.
Awful phrase. I think there's a book actually that's actually called that. Everything's it's American, of course. Everything's figure-outable. But I genuinely think, and this doesn't just come from sort of like some, airy-fairy, hopeful thing, although I love that. Is it a Nick Cave quote that hope is optimism with its heart broken? I am ever hopeful, but I'm hopeful because I've had some difficult things in my life, in my childhood, in my early, but as most people do, you're not going to live a life and not have some stuff knock on your door that could knock you down. But, I've always found support, whether it be professional support, whether it be friendships, whether it be creativity. There are many, many things. So I have that hopeful sense within me. So I think when I hear it, of course, as a therapist, you're always trained to sit with what is. You don't rush to any solution at all. And that's incredibly important in what we do in suicide prevention. And I think it's a natural thing that we do as humans. We hear someone struggling. We want to move them on. We want them not to be feeling like that. But often that's because we can't bear the feeling in ourselves. So actually you have to sit with it. But at the same time, like I said, I've always got these two hands. One can sit with it and really hear it and not try and rush somebody on. But I've always got another part of me that's going, what can solve this? What can move this forward? How can we help this person who has felt and genuinely believes that life has nothing to offer, to actually show them all that stuff that is good? And I think kind of joy and hope is an act of resistance. And so I am a little bit of I feel like I'm fighting it a bit. There's a bit of me like, you're not going to tell me that life ain't worth living. I don't mean the individual, I mean society.
Yeah.
So, I think that is very much what goes on for me. I can bear depth of feeling very, would I say comfortably? Maybe not comfortably. I often say to people, just because it looks like I'm carrying it lightly doesn't mean it's not heavy. And I say that to a lot of people who do this work. And that's, you have to look after yourself. You have to make sure that you're filling your bucket and don't do all the emotional labor yourself, because some of us who have good empathy or, are able to manage people's feelings, all of that, it needs to be something we're all kind of good at, really.
There's so much in that. And it kind of, there's a few points you mentioned then is, earlier on you said, I'm glad I'm alive is very important to Calm's message. And you also said naive positivity that a lot of young people need. I think I had some of that. But I also got to the point where I perhaps, it was questioning my own existence. And I was, at the end of my teen years, early 20s, and I always got frustrated that I saw calm, but I also knew that a lot of people in my hometown never saw calm. And I realized how lucky and fortunate I was because of my education in order that allowed me to get a job in London and therefore be exposed to an incredibly powerful charity campaign in central London. And I think in my work, I'm sometimes desensitized to suicide until I see a young person who dies by suicide. And then my heart breaks.
And speak to any parent who has lost a young person to suicide as well. If it would be hard to be desensitized. It's that magic bit, isn't it, where you've got to have the emotion come into you to kind of motivate you, but it can't come into you the point where it actually takes you down, that it actually makes you think, oh gosh, I can't do anything about this. It's got to be like that fire in your belly, but a fire to do something about it.
Yeah. And it's such an important predictor of society, hearing what young people are saying now. Are decision makers hearing these conversations? Like, you speak so powerfully around what you've experienced. And I can't help but think that if more people in a position of power and influence could hear what is happening, then more would be done.
Yeah, I mean, is it selective deafness, selective blindness? Is it looking at the list of things that need to be done and kind of prioritizing? I mean, I am a great believer of the whole thing of like hierarchy of need, that actually for people to feel able to question who they are, or feel okay enough to make plans for a life well lived, they need to be in a kind of they need to have some secure housing. They need to know that their parents or themselves have got an income that manages the cost of living, the real basics. If you don't have those things, I think it's very difficult to do the other stuff. And if you're just living in a kind of fight to provide for those basics, so I think anything a government does to actually provide for the basics and understand what it takes to live a life, I think then I see that as suicide prevention in a way. But then on the other hand, actually, most of the time, the charity sector are the ones who are doing the kind of the real specialist stuff, and in a vacuum at times, or so your experience of seeing calm, that's fabulous, but we want everyone to be able to see calm, don't we? Now, it shouldn't be that if there are charities that are able to do really good work, are only able to do as much good work as they're able to fundraise for. That isn't a sign of a good society. No. So, okay, if a government is going to leave charities to do the work because we're very good at it, help us do that work. Either help us do that work by creating a system where people don't end up feeling suicidal, or make sure that we are funded to catch those people that will end up there.
Which is one of the driving factors behind questioning the default, because if we know so much around how people are living their lives and some of the risk factors to suicide, yet we see how much time in charities is focused on fundraising just to give people life-saving answering phone abilities, like something's wrong within that. And you once said back in 2023, a truly progressive government would step up and take its responsibility for suicide prevention seriously. That wasn't that long ago. And we've seen some changes and what appear to be advances. What would you say now if the government were here, or if Keir Starmer was here with us?
Yeah, change is slow, isn't it? I think that you need to be brave and bold. And as I just said there, either support those who are able to do it, because a government can do so much, I think, because there will be people when they struggle. I mean, we've already spoken a bit about how people, when they struggle, they'll often not reach out, even if all the services and support is there. So I think there's something about us needing to, as a society, so as a government, to acknowledge that society drives suicide. We can't over-personalise it. And I think, again, that's that two hands thing. We have to personalise it to the degree where somebody knows I personally am struggling and I might need some help. But at the same time, we also have to understand it is in a context of society that drives that makes life unlivable. So that idea of, I think we're going a little bit too far at the moment into a narrative around, resilience and grit, and just get on with it. Life's tough, just suck it up. Well, let's look at who is actually saying that. I would question to what degree they've had a privileged life where they've never reached a point where actually they don't know how they are actually going to feed themselves and their family in the next 24 hours. They will not have had an experience where they have tried to access the workplace and have been discriminated against in one way or another. So I think that idea, I love resilience as an idea, and I can talk about it forever. What resilience is not just grit and going, push on through, because pushing on through does not actually get you very far, apart from maybe the next step in front of you.
Society drives suicide. I feel like it'd be like a title of a book that is about how we reimagine how society could actually prevent suicide if reimagined. How would you try to get more people into this idea that actually we need to focus on some of the driving factors that create suicide risk versus trying to help people at that crisis point?
I think for sure helping people along that route is a more straightforward or kind of fruitful, less frightening place to intervene than at the crisis point. And also the point I'd like to make about crisis is that you can support somebody in a crisis and help them step out of that crisis point. But if nothing changes in what got them to there, they're back in that crisis again. So we do not want this constant spend of a person's life to just be constantly going in and out of crisis. But actually, for understanding, and again, I want to be generous to us as a society that we learn what we learn as human beings do. We do the best we can with what we know. We do actually know a lot more now. So Rory O'Connor's work, for example. Really in-depth, detailed work that helps us understand the drivers of society, of suicide, and actually just even within the whole, how do you go from thinking and feeling about suicide to actually acting on it? There's plenty in there, and that's the kind of stuff that gets me excited and that we utilise at Calm to plan our interventions and our work. There's a lot there to help people understand for themselves. I'm having these experiences. I've lost a job, but my relationship's broken down. My identity, which I think is a really big part that we have to help people think about a bit more. My identity has been challenged. I don't feel like I've got any place to go now. Life will be better off without me. My pain would be gone, and the pain of those people that love me would be gone also. That belief, if we can help people understand that kind of mix of factors, that recipe, if you like, that can lead there, I just think it empowers that person to know that it's not just them. So that's for me where we need to be painting much bigger pictures about what it means to be a human being, what it looks like when you're starting to go on a really negative trajectory, and how you can then intervene at those places and really start to help somebody think about how I can reimagine who I am. Because, we often speak about, there's something that we quite usually say now, you can't be what you can't see. Well, I don't know that we can be anything that we can't imagine. So that idea of a society, that what does a society look like that prevents suicide? We have to be able to imagine what that is at the same time as fighting to kind of make a difference to what we're facing at the moment.
You mentioned then around this mix of factors, implying perhaps it's not a single, perhaps root cause often around suicide. As someone who's very, very senior and responsible perhaps for the helpline, what are some of these factors that you see? Are you seeing a growth and trends in some areas of those factors?
I think the kind of the perfect storm, if you like, of factors is around things of where somebody feels trapped, where someone feels defeated. And from those experiences come a really strong sense of shame. So something's happened that I think, something's happened or is happening where I feel I can't get out of it. It's defeating me. It's making me feel completely disempowered as a human being, that I can't change it and I'm worthless in some way. And therefore, I feel total shame. And that could be anything.
Okay.
And I think it's really important that we help people understand that kind of back to the feelings again, how I feel. Because if we start to say, this situation could lead to suicidality, which of course is important to know. We know debt, we know a whole range of issues that can contribute to it. But I think it becomes more usable for people if we help them see, in a way, it doesn't really matter
Okay.
It matters how you are feeling and experiencing what has happened to you. Because say, for example, somebody is in a relationship and they are feeling like it's not really working for them, and they decide between them and their partner that they're not going to stay together any longer. That might be a hopeful move forward for both of them. The other hand, if it's two people, one person doesn't want the relationship to end, one of them does. The person leaves, the person left behind feels really ashamed that it's happened. They feel blamed. They feel completely they'll never be in a relationship again. Then you can see where they might actually think, okay, there isn't anything for me to live for.
Yeah.
So I think we need to be careful not to get too caught up in the situations, although that's societal wide and we do have to acknowledge it. So that's the society driver. But I think if you want to help people acknowledge and get some support and help people who want to look after their loved ones, look at how they're feeling. Look at the words they're using about feeling hopeless or trapped, or there's nothing here for me, or this is unbearable. All of those feelings and thoughts, I think that's where we can sort of engage more. And when I look at the helpline, I mean, that's, people will be calling quite often with a sense that they are really struggling. But it will be digging into the experience and how it's leaving them feeling and challenging some of that in a gentle way, as in sort of, so you have decided, or the thing you've taken from, let's go back to that example, the thing you've taken from your partner leaving is that you're unlovable, that you caused this problem, that you're no good as a human being. Let's look at that. So I love all sorts of therapeutic modalities, but there's one that I really love called narrative therapy, where it looks at how often we make fat conclusions from thin evidence. So we believe a whole host of things that actually, when we get to talk it through, the seed of it is quite small. And we've grown a whole oak tree of belief around it. And actually, you can start to work with somebody on some of those branches and some of those bits and start to take it apart. And then that idea of like, actually, you can grow something new based on actual reality, not on the various things that you've been told and you've experienced and your beliefs you've taken in. I think something really powerful and that's helped me at hardest times in my life is when you say to yourself, I am the only thinker in my head. I am actually in charge of what goes on in there. And then when you start to look at that, you see how much of what goes on isn't what you put in there, isn't what you truly believe, isn't what you want to believe, but it's got in there and it's taken hold. So I think those kind of things are really important to start to unravel for people, unravel when they feel they're unraveling.
You talk so much about identity without necessarily always saying the word identity, which I know you have said a couple of times, but this idea of reimagining what you could be applies to society and individuals. So at that point, this idea of almost thin evidence becoming the way you see yourself, I can definitely relate to, for sure. And I can think about individual people who helped me not see that. And it was not people that tried to convince me that I'm not that. It was the people that actually took time to understand me, see me for who I was, understand why I'm driven in the way that I am, understand the quirks, things that I struggle with, things that make me who I am. But I think I didn't have connection for so much of my life that there was not necessarily the people there to help me make sense of that. And I worry about young people growing up in a society that may have perhaps on the surface less opportunity. It feels as if we are in the kind of dawn of constant change all the time with governments, political systems impacting how we live our lives. And so how do we, for young people, allow them to see that they can be truly anything they want to be?
Yeah, I mean, I think identity is a huge one. And I think when you see people who are really struggling and feeling like they can't go on, often their identity has been very fixed and it's somehow been smashed, broken, or broken open often. And there's an opportunity in that, but it doesn't feel like that if you don't have a sense of flexibility within it. I think when it comes to young people, helping them even have a concept of identity. And we have that a bit more now. I think people are allowing themselves to identify themselves, not be told who they are. But I think there's an identity, and then there's this idea of you can be anything that you want to be. I think there's some power in that, but then that if it doesn't also come with a warning of like, life won't necessarily deliver to your door what you want to be, but your identity belongs to you. It's something that you own, and then no matter what happens to you outside, that isn't taken away. Now, how do you kind of stay robust in that? And that's the kind of the resilience piece, really. Yeah. And for me, resilience for young people is very much about three factors. I have, I am, and I can. And often we can think that resilience is the I can bit. I can push through. I can be whoever I want. I can, no matter what happens to me, still be, I don't know, whatever your ideal is for yourself. But the other ones are really important as well. I am lovable. I am someone people care about. I have people to turn to. I have an ability to rise above challenge, but I have those that will keep an eye out for me when I'm struggling. So it's that mixture. And I think, again, these are really simple things. These are things that I've worked with children and young people around. And you give them that sense and work with adults around them as well to say, these are the kind of areas that your young person needs to have in their life to genuinely be able to manage the onslaught. As you say, change. Things are happening all of the time. We need people to be empowered and strong enough in their own identity to fight wrongs, to try and make life better. But there has to be some flexibility in that. But I think this idea of resilience or an identity that makes you super powerful does not help anybody.
And that also comes back to the point you said earlier around, that almost fallout from a parent's experience of bringing up their children that can almost by nature then impact a child's life chances and the way that they see themselves and behaviours. So for parents who are perhaps trying to make sense of their own mental health and their own feelings and emotions and identity, how can they also be there for children at the same time as a school system that perhaps has some potential to be somewhat more inclusive of young people's and their identities? How do we get this balance right between the role of the parent and the role of the school system?
I think it comes back to flexibility. Of course, people have got a sense of what they want for their children and what they hope that they will achieve, and the systems they go out into, which ones accept them, which encourage them, which kind of, we come back to control in a way. I mean, having children is the best opportunity to find out you have no control as anything I've ever experienced. I mean, we want to think that we can control things and we really can't. So it's back to that kind of resilience again. I think parents need to have it within themselves that there are things that they can control, and it is that basic stuff. Can you make sure your child feels loved, feels understood, has a vocabulary to explain and express how they are? Do they also know that there are limits and boundaries? And are you putting limits and boundaries on yourself? Don't expect anything of your child that you're not able to do yourself. So if you want them to be able to manage their emotions and their impulses, what are you doing? How are you managing your own? I think those sense of community as well. I think we've kind of, as much as we can sometimes over-personalize suicide, we can reduce the family down to the parents and the children. And actually, the idea of having that bigger group around you, which is why at Calm, when it came to looking at youth suicide and being, just not accepting the fact that these numbers looked as they were, as in not accepting it for going forward, we looked at how can we upskill what we call trusted adults so that young people have a network around them. So it isn't just down to parents, because sometimes when you're a young person anyway, it might not be your parents you want to speak to, because you're actually, back to what I said before, of like, you've got one foot in the family, you've got one foot in the outside world. Yeah. Your parents are maybe not always the right people to speak to. So actually we need a network of people. We need that community. And we know that community and sense of belonging is a real safeguard against suicidality as well. So it's a kind of win on all levels. So, we're in a society, I think, currently that pushes us too much to that individualistic approach. And so, again, back to the two hands. Yes, take personal responsibility. Do everything you can to make sure your child is okay, you are okay. And at the same time, know that there needs to be a community around you to make that safe and possible.
We often hear that 75% of suicides are male. I think it's really important to recognise that. But in doing so, Calm is not just a charity focused on men.
No, it was in its early days, but I think as time's gone on, it's been able to kind of evolve. And the figures that kind of worry me the most at the moment are the rise in young women who are dying by suicide. And I think as well, when you look at the studies, we know that although more men die by suicide, more women attempt. And if you think that often the primary caregiver will be a female, so that actually is there more a definition of living miserably than repeatedly attempting suicide? And can you imagine what it might be like for children to be growing up in that environment? So massively important, I think, that we're looking also, and we're not gender specific about what the issues are. I think we need to understand what the issues within that are that can drive someone to feel so hopeless that they can't carry on. But I think we need to have it as wide as possible. And certainly when we were looking at young women, what was disappointing was because there's this kind of default maybe of assuming that women talk about their feelings and they've got all sorts of layers of support. Actually, when you're really struggling, and if you're a young woman, often you won't feel able to do that. That actually, especially, we look at social media, everybody's best foot forward, living fabulous lives. All of that curated content can leave people struggling, feeling that they're not part of that and needing to keep it. So keep it in shame, but also then not able to reach out when they need help. And then what we found in our study is that when those women were going to seek professional help in some quarters, especially in kind of GPs or health settings, their needs were minimized. They was being told they were being, kind of, oh, you'll be fine, or you're being overdramatic, or, you've just a kind of an assumption that because it's a female talking about it, then she's okay. And that really isn't the case. So
does that put people at greater risk if they experience that type of kind of first initial, really, is it that big of a problem type mentality?
I think it will put people definitely at risk of feeling that it's okay to value what they're going through as something that they could get some help with. It will actually kind of put you into silence even more. And we know struggle puts you into silence and suicide thrives in silence. So any kind of minimizing of anyone, whether it be, in a professional setting or even, with a friend. We have this thing sometimes where we'll sort of ask somebody, you're okay, aren't you? And we're kind of, we're giving them the answer in the question. We're telling them we can only bear one answer to this question. Or sometimes you're not thinking of doing anything silly, are you? You're already telling them that, it's silly. If you admit that you're struggling, it's silly.
Why do we do that?
Why do you think we do it?
Are we scared of the answer? Or
we don't know what to do with the answer, and we're probably scared of some of those feelings within ourselves, and we're on the run, actually. I often say to people, if you think of the word emotion, the biggest part of that word is motion, energy in motion. And actually, if you allow the feeling, if you really go into it, especially if you've got a kind of a witness and a support, somebody that's holding your hand or at least is there to remind you that you're valuable and lovable and things can be different, then it passes through. No feeling is final. And that's true of a good feeling as well. But, when we eat food, I don't want to get too kind of like basic about this, but when we eat food, it passes through our body. There's an end point, is there not?
There is.
What would happen if that didn't happen? We just constantly stuff ourselves of food and constantly nothing, no process, nothing, then, well, that wouldn't work, would it?
All sorts of complications, yeah.
And emotions are not too different to that.
Yeah, they're not final. It will change type mentality. And also, we hear about the growing demands on the helpline, and this, more people are calling the helpline for support. In itself, that's hopeful, I think, in that people are alive, they're talking, and I assume as a helpline, therefore they are wanting help. Like, what an amazing opportunity, but that gives your team. How do you make sense of the fact that someone is coming to you at their perhaps lowest point, darkest point, most painful point? How do you even start a conversation at that point?
I think you absolutely hit the nail on the head. If somebody is making that, if they're reaching out on some level, they feel that help is out there or that they deserve to get it. There's something hopeful within it. So I think always that's how you manage to stay resilient working in a helpline scenario, that every single contact that comes through is hopeful and is an opportunity. And I think another way that we help kind of bolster ourselves to do the work at the helpline is that we have a paid workforce who are trained in a particular way of working so that they're able to listen and hear the distress of somebody, but they're very interventionist, action focused as well. Their focus is wanting to help that person leave the call in a different place than when they entered it. And that's not to remove all of the stress that's going on for them or entirely remove them from that kind of space of suicidality. But if they're at a point of crisis, can we help them step back from that so that they can take a breath and actually look at what support they might need? If they're at a point of feeling like they're starting to think about suicide, can we actually help them move to a place where they're not actually, they might be still struggling, but suicide has been taken off the table. So it's very much about working in that stepped way with people, engage with everybody, rapport build some kind of trust, even in moments. And you do all of that with tone of voice or words if it's online. But often people, when they're reaching out, it is a golden opportunity and always hopeful.
So the helpline itself, when is it open? How do people access the helpline?
Our helpline is open every single day of the year from 5 p.m. to midnight. People often say, why then? Well, that's the time when other services are not available. It's often the time when people are kind of on their own and maybe have some time to kind of reach out and get help. You can access via the telephone, 0800 58 58 58. Many people choose to do it that way, but you can also access it online to have a web chat or WhatsApp. Younger people often are preferring the online approach, and then, others use the telephone. But it doesn't matter which way you decide to use. All our helpline staff are trained to meet you exactly where you are, to give you the time that you need. And although we don't encourage kind of long-term service provision on a helpline, because I've been involved in helplines for a long time. And unless it's a befriending helpline, which ours isn't, then actually you don't want people to kind of get dependent on the helpline. You want to help them move through something and then back out into the community to get the support that they need.
If Calm could, would you have that helpline open 24/7? Or would you increase the access to different forms of support?
I think I would be using Calm to deliver different kinds of support that are actually what I would call wraparound care. I've been involved in helplines that are 24/7, and it's a bit like somebody described it to me once, completely different scenario, but it's like if you have a motorway that has 2 lanes and it gets clogged and it's too full. You put a 3rd lane in, people just fill the 3rd lane. And now that's not to say that people don't have need, but actually we've worked really hard recently on our helpline to make it suicide specific. It was in the beginning. It then through the pandemic, for all good reasons, became available to anyone about anything. But then that just meant that we were not really getting to the people that needed us the most. So we've come back into really focusing on the suicide specific. So you can call our helpline if you're anywhere on that place from starting to think about or have thoughts about suicide all the way to actually feeling that you're going to act on it. Also, if you're someone who's worried about anyone on that spectrum, because actually often the person that can help somebody the best is somebody close to them. Not always their parent, as I said already, but it could be a friend, it could even be a colleague. So anyone who's worried about somebody, but also someone who's bereaved by suicide, as you'll know yourself, that can open up a whole area of risk for someone. If they've lost someone to suicide, it can add to their risk rather than be a protective factor.
And I think it's a really important point that somebody can call the Calm helpline if they are worried about somebody else and want advice, essentially. What would that look like? So let's say somebody's listening today and they've had this seed of doubt about someone that they love. They would ring Calm, they'd explain what sort of support would they get?
So they would get from the helpline in a one-to-one way, I think what Calm tries to do in its wider mission, which is help people have conversations about suicide, have a difficult conversation in a way that opens things up and that helps people feel like they're not ashamed or afraid. We definitely are promote the idea, and it's not just an idea, I think it's proven suicide prevention, that talking about it prevents it. And that fear that sometimes people have that if you say to someone directly, I'm worried about you, how are you having suicidal thoughts? Are you thinking about suicide? We need to smash the myth that saying that will put that idea in someone's head, or if they're having those thoughts already, that will trigger them to actually act. And the absolute opposite is true. The way I would describe it is that when you're in that mind place of feeling that it's rational, I think we need to understand and accept and respect that when somebody is at a point of suicidal thoughts and feelings and actions, for them it feels rational. It makes sense. For whatever reason, it makes sense. So you don't go at somebody in a kind of like shock or how could you, or look at all the wonderful things in your life, or just think about who would miss you so much, all of those things. You have to understand that it's a rational place that person is at. Now, they might have made a whole host of beliefs build up to that actually need to be kind of challenged in some way, but helping somebody ask directly can sort of shatter that bubble of rationality that person is sitting in, and then they come out of it, and that's where you can start to have conversation.
Because I think that's the biggest potential that we have as individual people to help everybody around us, is to be able to ask clearly and directly about suicide. But I personally don't think enough people have the confidence and not necessarily ability, but have that kind of peace of mind on exactly what you just said, which is actually, this is not going to put that thought into somebody's head. And obviously, Calm's done amazing work with the Calm Care Toolkit, and just everything that Calm stands for is about having that clear and direct conversation. It is okay to do that. But I think that if there was a way for people to access this earlier on in their lives, to be fluent in talking about suicide, yes, we normalize it to a degree, which of course comes with other considerations and watch outs. But at least then if we start talking about it and using the language, I didn't use the word for like 10 years of my life. It became this thing that was kind of wrapped up over here. And I am somebody who lost someone to suicide, lost my dad. And if there were more fluent conversations, I think I would have been able to make sense of my feelings better. Do you think the school system could play a role there? Do you think it's too early for children to talk and learn about suicide?
We've heard recently that the government is going to ensure that by 2026, suicide prevention is compulsory in secondary schools. So that is huge. That is massive. Because I think it's important not only that we talk about suicide, that we can say the words. I think people have a fear. What do they do next? Talking about it, the fluency comes in. Somebody actually says, yes, you're right, I am. Then what? So when we were designing the care kit, it was very much about not just how you ask the question, but what you do with the answer. And I think a really big one is to know that you're not meant to be the specialist, but you are meant to be able to say to that person, I really hear you. Let me help you get some help. And to even say to someone, I can see you don't have any hope for yourself right now, but I have hope for you. Let me hold that while we get you some help. Bear with me, stay with me, just stay long enough for us to look at what we can get, what's available. Let me find some stuff out. You prepare yourself before the conversation, find out, here's Calm Helpline, give them a ring, or have called the Calm Helpline before you do it. Life doesn't always work like that. You can't always be prepared in that way. But if you can ask, and then you can say to somebody, this is really normal. Lots of people feel like this. There's lots of help out there. Let me help you get it. I'm not going to leave you on your own while you feel like this. Those are the kinds of things that create that fluency. And then you're able to ask because you know what to do next.
What's the danger if we start to convince people of the things that they have in their life at that point? So think about your job, your children, your house, everything that you've done. I hear a lot that, we want people to be happy, fulfilled, and we try and drag them to that point of safety. We do it for them because we know that they have so much to live for. And in doing so, by nature, we can then talk about all the amazing things they have in their life. Are they thinking about those things at that point? Someone who's at risk and thinking about suicide.
I think usually at that point, people will have thought about those things through and through, over and over. And that's the rationality that often they will feel that those people will be better off without them. Genuinely think that. If you're feeling so bad about yourself and you feel that you're such a weight for other people to carry because you're not able to carry your own weight currently, you actually think your children will be better off. You think one day it will be better that I'm not here for them. They actually will feel that and think that and believe that. So I think if you actually try and say to them, you're wrong, in that moment, it's not actually going to be helpful. It's like, I hear how you're feeling. I think that we can look into some of that, but right now, let's keep you safe. Can you stay with me long enough for us to get you into a safe place so we can have some of these conversations? You can't drag anyone out of anywhere. What you can help do is stand by their side and take step after step after step. And actually, that is a more hopeful message, because even as a professional, as I consider myself to be, if somebody said to me, Wendy, here's somebody who feels suicidal, you've got a couple of hours to talk to them. And at the end, I want you to make sure that they're not suicidal at all and all of their life is sorted out. Well, I am not going in that room with that person. No matter how skilled I am, I would feel like I was setting us both up to fail. If, on the other hand, I was going in there to meet them where they are, help them feel listened to, heard, loved, accepted, a little bit of hope, that I don't have to dig into, that I even have to maybe say to them, I hold the hope, you don't. Just let's kind of step out of this dark room and have us start to think about where you might get some help and get some safety. Just stay for a while so that we can start to look at some of these things in depth. That is a conversation anybody can have.
Stay for a while. That's such a, help them at that particular point, and then be perhaps one of the major contributing factors for them to get support hand in hand with you and standing by their side. I mean, you say it so powerfully and eloquently. I wish everyone had this knowledge, which is why you're in the exactly right place for the role that you do. And thank you. So we have a set of recurring questions that we ask guests, and you can choose to not answer. You can choose to elaborate. You can choose to have one-word answers if you wish. So what's one societal default you could erase or rewrite if you could?
That vulnerability is weakness. And actually, I think if you just have an idea of any time you've seen anybody be brave, quite often they themselves will feel very vulnerable in that moment. So actually, that vulnerability is a strength, and vulnerability is really about being human.
Lovely. And what's a belief you used to hold about perhaps mental health, yourself, or suicide that you've since let go of?
I think a belief I used to hold, and this was a long time ago, and maybe one of the reasons why I got into kind of wanting to train as a one-to-one therapist, was that I believed that it was individual. It was the individual that actually, if you help them, I mean, I had really solid experience of therapy at a fairly early age. Two things happened almost simultaneously. My father died, and then I got a record deal within days. And I really found it hard to kind of match those two things together. The biggest kind of loss in my life and the biggest door opening. And actually, I just seemed to happen to pick up a self-help book, which I'd never come across anything like that before in my life. And in the back, it said, there's this therapy centre, it's for women, it's for this. And I went along and did art therapy and all of these different things. So I think I had had such a powerful and transformative experience of one-to-one therapy. I kind of believed that that's the answer. And I think it's part of the answer. I think that we have to acknowledge that there are lots of contributory factors that lead to an individual struggling. So helping that individual in a one-to-one way is really powerful. But actually, it's much bigger than that.
One part of a much wider system. That must be hard for you to reflect on that kind of joy that you had at that moment, but also coming at a really difficult time. So what's something you've never or rarely said publicly about your journey on mental health, but feel ready to perhaps share now?
I've only once in my life had suicidal thoughts and feelings, and that was as a teenager, when I had done something that I felt was so bad. Actually, it wasn't. I was a teenager. I thought it was. I thought I was going to get into trouble for something, and the amount of shame that I felt, and I just could not bear the idea of letting my family down. And I had some thoughts then of genuinely, how? But I've never had it since. And sometimes it can feel difficult in this field to be that hope, if you like, to be that solution-focused person. So sometimes, just to not really spoken about my own suicidality, just occurring that once. But it only takes once, doesn't it? And perhaps because I had that shame, but I had a stronger sense of, actually, there's a big life out there and I want to live it, that got me through.
Well, thank you for sharing that. That's you can still reflect on that moment. How old were you at that point, roughly?
17, so I was still living at home. I was in the middle of doing my A-levels. I'd stolen something.
Okay.
And that was so not in our family. There was none of that. I come from a huge family, and I'm always very proud to say nobody in my family ever went to prison. Nobody in my family ever did this. Because sometimes when you come from a large family, people will assume that there's all sorts of, even when I was training in kind of child therapy, they would often say, one of the risk factors is a large family. Look at this, look at the other. So I had this kind of proud sense of, and my mum and dad were very proud as well of kind of holding us all together and doing okay. But at that time, my father had gone bankrupt and we were losing our home. Anyone who knew anything would know that I was struggling and kind of I stole something. But straight away I had this feeling of like, I'm going to get found out. And I just could not see how I would be able to be. And it goes back to identity. I think at that point I was the good girl. I was doing my A-levels. I was doing well. My parents were going through a lot. I didn't want to be a trouble to them. So that kind of was smashing into some of that stuff.
Thank you for sharing that. So closing thoughts now. If we were to record this again in 2035, what do you hope we'll be talking about then? But perhaps what do you worry we might still be talking about?
I would hope in 10 years' time we're able to celebrate the fact that suicide levels have plummeted and that we're able to talk about how we did that to make sure that it carries on that way. Of course, I'm worried that the opposite will be true, that not only will they have not plummeted, they will have risen. And then we haven't managed to break through. We haven't managed to break through the noise that is actually becoming so overwhelming for people. But I'll do everything I can alongside Calm to make sure, as will you, for that not to happen.
Thank you. And finally, what are your thoughts on AI and the future? What might it mean for you and perhaps those that you love?
I'm very curious about AI. I'm totally aware, as somebody who's been responsible to delivering services to human beings where the demand is far outstripping our ability to supply. Is there a way that could assist in a safe way? Or even is it, at the moment we might be looking at AI for the helpline as to how we manage some of the kind of paperwork stuff or the, supporting the helpline worker to do their job, to feel supported, that kind of thing, not the speaking to somebody. Yeah. I think that one-to-one human stuff is always going to be really important. But I am really fascinated to look at, and I mean, I've tested AI quite a few times myself, asked it some really difficult questions, and I've been a little bit impressed by its answer. As a therapist, it would be saying something even more detailed than I. On the other hand, I think it can also be known as something that can agree with you. And if it misunderstands what you're asking, especially if you're at risk, I'm very worried about those kind of things. But I do think that we need to kind of embrace it and find a way of it being a kind of like, the friend in the pocket, really.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. Absolutely loved that, but I know we're on a fairly tight schedule. But thank you so much for everything that you shared on the personal side of things, all the amazing work that you've done over the years, and especially now at Calm, keeping more people alive and showing that actually that thought is not necessarily final, and actually that it is possible to reimagine the life that you could live and who you could be. And I think that really does save lives, and I'm incredibly, incredibly grateful. And Wendy, hopefully you'll come on again in the future. Maybe we're talking about AI or perhaps one of those kind of the niche topics that you mentioned now.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. Today, we question the default that help must look clinical, sound worthy, and wait for people to come to it. Wendy reminded us to meet people where they are, in music, sport, culture, and everyday language. And that self-conversation often comes before asking for support. Early care changes trajectories. And for me, I think, Wendy is somebody that not many people are going to have that amount of experience and time looking at this. So for someone, over 2 decades worth of knowledge, sharing their insight today in such a very candid way, I think kind of really shows the kind of level of care that she puts into creating the helpline, what it is over at Calm. I think Wendy herself, she's been on her own journey, not always the easiest and filled with highs and lows, which she shared today with us. But I think we have to spend more time meeting people where they're at. Like, we have no choice. I think young people are entering into a world of uncertainty and change. And we know that the job market to conversation changes around in the geopolitical space are impacting young people's lives, let alone a whole host of other reasons. And if we're not going to spend time understanding young people's issues and concerns, and then not understanding where they're spending their time, or we're going to be always at a miss as to what could have been when it comes to supporting them. And I think Wendy, I do look up to her from a sense of the honesty and courage she has to be vulnerable today in the way that she did.
in every episode we share that one thing that has never been shared publicly, and perhaps they feel ready to now. And for me, that will always stick with me, what Wendy shared with us today. But she's just a genuinely kind person. Like, she always gives you time. Like, she's one of those people that, if you're in trouble, and as weird as it might sound, because I don't know Wendy amazingly well, but I would put her quite high on that list, purely because she can hold and really kind of honest and important conversations. Like, I could imagine being very open to her. And it's very hard to teach that. And of course, she has a therapeutic background and very, very aware as to how to hold that space. But she has like this ability to just do like very small things, to know that she's listening and to know that she cares. And she randomly like bought like some cherries that she had been picking over the weekend, and she had them like kind of spare, and she wanted to kind of make sure that they were being used, and she brought them with us in a really nice bag and then said like, this is for you. Like a really, really small touch. Yeah, I've been overthinking about how do I gift kind of everyone coming onto the podcast, but she did that for me. She explained how this was out of her normal routine for her working week, but how important it was for her to be on and share her story today. I hope in the future we can get Wendy on again to talk about some of the details that perhaps I wish we had more time to chat through. The importance of self and identity, but also looking at young people, like understanding what are those real challenges that they're facing, and how do we make sure that we're setting up our school system and our workplaces suitable in a way that actually caters for the needs of young people entering those spaces. We touched on it, of course, today, but I think there's so much more to be said. And just a massive thank you for Wendy for coming on.